My name is Cayman. I'm 78 years old, and I want to begin tonight by telling you about a quality of stillness that most people never find. Not because it is hidden or rare or reserved for exceptional human beings, but because it requires something that almost no one is taught and almost no one practices. Not calmness on the surface while chaos runs underneath. Not the performance of composure while anxiety keeps its grip on everything below. Real stillness, deep stillness, the kind that holds its ground when someone says something that would normally destroy your peace in an instant. The kind that doesn't vanish when the phone rings with bad news. The kind that stays intact even when everything around you is uncertain and loud and pressing for a reaction. I spent 60 years without this kind of stillness, and then I found it. Not through luck, not through a natural disposition toward calm, through understanding, through practice, through the gradual, patient, sometimes painful work of building an inner life that doesn't depend on outer conditions to remain stable. Tonight I want to share what I found. Because the world you are living in is louder and more demanding than any world I faced in my youth. And if there is one thing a man needs right now, more than strategy, more than ambition, more than any skill the world rewards, it is this: the ability to stand in the middle of the storm and not be moved. Let me tell you what I was before I learnt this, because the distance between where I started and where I am now is the only honest way to measure what's possible. I was a man who reacted to everything. Every criticism landed as an attack. Every disappointment became evidence of something fundamentally wrong. Every unexpected development triggered a cascade of anxiety that I would then mask with action, with planning, with the furious activity of a man trying to outrun his own nervous system. I was capable, productive, respected, and completely at the mercy of whatever was happening around me. My inner state was a direct reflection of my outer circumstances. When things were good, I was calm. When things were uncertain, I was anxious. When things went wrong, I was destabilized, sometimes for days. I had no inner ground. I had only outer conditions. And outer conditions are never reliable. They are by nature always changing, always unpredictable, always one phone call away from requiring a complete recalibration of everything you thought was settled. The first thing I had to understand is something that sounds philosophical but is completely practical. The disturbance is never in the event. It is always in the relationship between the event and your interpretation of it. Something happens, a setback, a criticism, an unexpected change. And between that event and your response to it, there is a space. Most men never discover this space because they move too quickly from event to reaction. The event happens and the reaction follows so fast that it seems automatic, inevitable, as if the event caused the reaction the way a match causes a flame. But it doesn't. There is always a space. And in that space lives the possibility of choosing, of responding rather than reacting, of meeting what happened from a place of steadiness rather than from a place of being knocked off center. The entire practice of unshakable calm is the practice of finding that space, of enlarging it, of learning to live in it long enough to choose consciously rather than react automatically. I spent years thinking that the things happening around me were the cause of my disturbance, that if only circumstances would cooperate, if only people would behave as they should, if only the world would arrange itself according to my expectations, I could be calm. But circumstances never cooperated. People never behaved as they should. The world never arranged itself according to my expectations, and so I was never calm. Not really, not in the deep, unshakable way I am talking about. Because the calm I was chasing was conditional. It required the world to be a certain way before I could access it. And a calm that requires conditions is not calm at all. It is simply the temporary absence of whatever usually disturbs you. If something in this is reaching something in you, if you recognize your own reactive patterns in what I'm describing, stay with me. Because what I want to share next is the actual practice. The thing I built over years that eventually became a quality of presence rather than a technique. And if this space is offering you something real, come back when you need it. Because this work is not done once, it is done daily, in small moments, against the constant pull of a world that wants your reaction every second. The first practice is the simplest and the hardest. When something disturbs you, stop before you respond. Not to suppress, not to deny what you're feeling, to insert the pause that creates space between event and response. One breath, sometimes two, long enough to notice what is actually happening in your body, where the tension is, what the feeling actually is beneath the surface reaction. And in that noticing, something shifts. Because when you observe your own disturbance instead of being swept into it, you are no longer identical with it. You become the one who sees it rather than the one who is it. And from that position of observer, the reaction loosens its grip. It is still there, but it is not driving anymore. You are. I began practicing this in the smallest possible moments, not the large ones, not the crisis, the small irritations that I had always allowed to hook me immediately. Someone cutting into traffic, a message that arrived in a tone I didn't appreciate, a plan that changed without my input. These small hooks, the daily friction of living among other human beings, became my practice ground. Each time one of them appeared, I tried to insert the pause. And at first I failed constantly. The reaction happened before I remembered to pause. But slowly, over months and years, the pause began to appear earlier, to last longer, to create more space. And with more space came more choice. And with more choice came something I had not expected: dignity. the particular dignity of a man who chooses how he responds, rather than simply revealing everything he feels the moment it arises. The second practice addresses the root cause of most disturbance, which is this: we suffer primarily from our attachment to how things should be, not from how things are, from how they should be. When reality deviates from our picture of how it should be, disturbance arises. Not because the deviation is necessarily terrible, but because we have a strong and often unconscious investment in the picture. The picture is the real source of the pain, and the picture, once you see it clearly, can be loosened, not abandoned, not surrendered, loosened, held with a lighter grip, approached with the understanding that reality will often deviate from the picture, not because reality is hostile, because reality is what it is, and what it is always larger and more complex and more unpredictable than any picture we can form of it. I learned to examine my pictures. When something disturbed me, I would ask myself, what was I expecting? What was the picture I had of how this should go? And almost always I found one. A clear, specific, often unexamined picture of how this person should behave, how this situation should unfold, how this day should proceed. And the gap between the picture and the reality was the source of the disturbance, not the reality itself, but my insistence that reality matched the picture. When I began to hold my pictures more loosely, when I began to enter situations with more openness to how they might actually unfold rather than how I had decided they should, the frequency and intensity of my disturbances decreased dramatically. Not because the world became more cooperative, because I became more honest about the nature of the world and about the source of my own suffering. The third practice is about the body, because unshakable calm is not primarily a mental achievement, it is a physical one. The body holds the disturbance before the mind names it, the tightening in the chest, the tension in the jaw, the shallow quality of the breath when something has unsettled you. And if you only work at the level of thought, trying to talk yourself into calm, you are working downstream of where the disturbance actually lives. The practice of returning to the body, of regularly bringing attention to physical sensation, of breathing into the places that hold tension, is not supplementary to the work of developing calm. It is central to it. A man who knows his body, who can feel the first signs of disturbance arising in his physical form, and who knows how to work with them rather than simply being overtaken by them, is already most of the way to the calm he is looking for. I developed a simple daily practice. Every morning, before anything else entered my attention, I sat for a few minutes with my body. Not meditating in any formal sense, just checking in, feeling where the tension was, breathing into it, not to eliminate it, to acknowledge it, to let my body know that I was paying attention, that I wasn't going to ignore it or override it or push it down, just to be present with it. This practice, repeated daily for years, built a quality of physical awareness that served me in every situation that required calm. Because when something disturbing happened, I already had the habit of coming back to my body. Already knew how to breathe into the center of the disturbance. Already had a pathway from reaction back to steadiness that had been walked so many times it required less and less effort to find. The fourth practice is about what you build your identity on. Because disturbances knock you off balance only when they touch something central to your sense of who you are. A man who has built his identity on his performance, on his reputation, on being right, on being respected, on things going a particular way, is perpetually vulnerable. Because performance wavers, reputation is subject to others' opinions, being right is challenged daily, respect comes and goes. Things rarely go the particular way. And every time these things are threatened, the identity is threatened. And when the identity feels threatened, the disturbance is immediate and intense. The work of becoming unshakable involves moving your sense of identity to something that cannot be threatened, not something external, something internal, something that does not change when circumstances change. Your values, your integrity, the quality of your presence in each moment, the way you meet what comes, not what comes, how you meet it. A man whose identity is rooted in how he engages with his life rather than in what his life produces is a man who can lose the external things without losing himself. This was perhaps the most difficult shift I made, because for most of my life, my sense of who I was depended heavily on how things were going. Good results meant I was on the right track. Bad results meant something was wrong with me. But gradually I transferred the weight of my identity from the results to the process, from what I was producing to how I was living. And in that transfer, something that had always been fragile became stable. Because the quality of my presence, the integrity of my engagement, the way I showed up for the moments of my life, those things were mine to determine. External circumstances could interfere with outcomes, but they could not interfere with who I chose to be in the moment of facing them. The fifth practice is the one that holds everything else together. It is the daily practice of deliberately sitting with discomfort, of not immediately escaping every unpleasant sensation or difficult emotion, of building through intentional exposure to small amounts of difficulty the tolerance that makes you unshakable in large ones. Most people spend enormous energy avoiding discomfort, physical discomfort, emotional discomfort, the discomfort of boredom, of stillness, of uncertainty, of not immediately knowing what to do. And this avoidance, though it provides temporary relief, weakens the system over time. Because a system that is never exposed to difficulty has no practice managing it, has no developed capacity for tolerating it. And when real difficulty arrives, as it always does, The system is overwhelmed by what a more practiced system would take in stride. I began deliberately sitting with small discomforts, a few minutes of stillness when I wanted to reach for distraction, staying in an uncomfortable conversation instead of redirecting it, remaining with an unresolved problem without immediately trying to solve it. These small practices built something real, a tolerance for the feeling of difficulty that made the actual difficulties of my life less destabilizing. Not because I stopped feeling them, but because I had practiced feeling difficult things and discovered repeatedly that the feeling was survivable, that I could tolerate more than I thought, that the discomfort did not require immediate escape. It required only presence. And presence was something I had been practicing every morning with my body, every afternoon with my pause, every day with the small, deliberate exposures to difficulty that was slowly making me unshakable. My name is Cayman. I'm 78 years old. I live in a small temple where the mornings are still and the evenings are still, and the life in between, while not without its difficulties, is met from a place of steadiness that I could not have imagined when I was a young man at the mercy of every passing circumstance. I did not get here by becoming unemotional. I got here by building a relationship with my emotions that allowed me to feel them without being run by them. By building a relationship with circumstances that allowed me to meet them without being defined by them. By building an inner ground solid enough to stand on when everything external was uncertain. That ground is available to you. It is not a gift you either have or don't have. It is something you build. One pause at a time. One loosened picture at a time. One morning of sitting with your body. One small, deliberate exposure to discomfort. One day of moving your identity from what you produce to how you live. These are not dramatic acts. They are ordinary ones, done consistently, over time, until the day you notice that something that would have knocked you down 6 months ago passes through you without leaving a mark. And you realize that you have become, without fanfare, without announcement, the kind of man who cannot be shaken. Tell me in the comments, where in your life does disturbance find its easiest entry? What is the thing that most reliably shakes you? Not because naming it is enough, but because naming it is always where the work begins.